He's a certified Scrum Master and certified Scrum Product Owner, and he's going to tell us about the difference between a business analyst and a product owner today. So, how about a welcome for our speaker? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
That's it? That's all I got?
Good evening, Jason.
Thank you. So, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you're having a good 2012 so far. So far, so good. We're only 5 days in. Guess it can't be too bad. So tonight, I want to first call. So my name's up there, but I've got Brian Bizzuto. So Brian just stood up and talk for a second. Brian can wave in the back. I have to thank Brian and give credit to Brian as well. So Brian and I actually paired together on this. It's a presentation we actually gave, a similar presentation we gave a few months ago at the IIBA, and so I think there's some really cool stuff in here. So I want to make sure that credits is certainly given to Brian. So we spent a bit of time with us. So hopefully you enjoy it tonight. But the idea is, so we're talking about kind of the path of business analyst to product owner, or even more generically, or less specifically perhaps, is it's not so much about business analysts. It may be anyone who's an analyst, or anyone who has aspirations or goals of being a product owner. You don't have to come from just one place, and we're going to talk about that. But one of the interesting things is that a lot of places, I think, tend to undervalue the role and responsibilities of a product owner. You see a lot about Scrum Masters and other people, developers, and not that those roles aren't important, but this one's pretty critical, actually. So I'm just curious, I'm going to make Nancy, I'm going to build on what Nancy did and make you kind of raise your hands. So just to help give me kind of a sense of who we have in the room. So are there any product owners or people that play product owner here in the room? We got 3 people. I feel sorry for you guys. Anybody else? Analysts? Systems analysts, business analysts? We got a few more hands there. Developers? More Scrum Master type people? Project manager people? Okay, what about the rest of you guys? Testers? Undecided? Functional managers. Sorry, I left those guys out. Managers? So a lot of times what happens is product owners are just simply looked at as, well, you're the person that, either you may have some authority, you may not, but a lot of times your product owners end up being just the person that decides what the team works on, or they're just the person that's the prioritizer of the backlog. And part of what I want to talk about tonight is that it's actually bigger than that. There's a much greater responsibility than just the person who prioritizes the backlog. Not that that's not a small role, but there's a lot more to it. You can go a lot further with it. Okay? So are people generally familiar with the idea of the role of a product owner? Head nods help? Okay. Oh, by the way, so as I go through this, if you have questions, feel free to stop me. I'd rather stop and discuss than kind of accumulate a bunch of stuff, so I'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So raise your hand, yell, throw something at me, whatever works for you. But just to kind of make sure that we're oriented correctly around kind of what the idea of a product owner is, so I stole a couple of definitions from the Scrum Alliance and from scrum.org. So the person responsible for the business value of the project, responsible for maximizing the value of the product and the work of the development team from scrum.org. So there's kind of 2 different variations in the same thing. It's the general theme there. So they're the prioritizer of the work. Sound pretty common? Sound pretty familiar to everybody? Pretty much what you're used to? Good, no surprises? So let's talk a little bit more about product owners. Say, well, what do we know about them? So some of the things that they have to do, some of the things that they're responsible for. So they're responsible for defining a product vision. Okay, that's important, that's pretty big. They have to be able to articulate some type of strategy to actually be able to achieve the vision. Well, that's equally important. Prioritizing the product backlog. There's that piece we talked a little bit before about kind of prioritizing the backlog. Decisions on product direction, mapping product vision to stories, accepting work results, that's an important piece. So kind of working with the team on a day-in, day-out basis, making sure that the increment of product that we're building is in fact the right product. Responsible for ROI. That's something that's actually pretty important, but doesn't tend to get a lot of billing. So product owner really thinking about, actually probably one of the best product owners I've worked with had a very keen sense of ROI. And so she would actually describe some functionality that she would want, the team would estimate it, and she'd say, no, that's too expensive. She wouldn't say your estimate's wrong, she'd say it's too expensive, I just don't want to invest that much in it. I don't get, the return that I get from that's not worthwhile for me, so what can I get for this amount of investment? And so that's actually an incredibly important thing for product owners to be thinking about and a mindset for them to be having constantly. often they're referred to as kind of the voice of the customer. So if you don't have direct access to your customer, you don't work directly with your customers, it's the product owner's responsibility to serve as the voice of that customer or customers. The stakeholder funnel, which all the requests flow through. So we'll kind of expand upon this a little bit more, but that's an important piece. So a lot of companies, larger companies in particular, there's a lot of stakeholders. Everybody wants their stuff taken care of. Everybody has their concerns that they want to address. So the responsibilities of the product owner are really around making sure that they serve as the funnel. They're out there collecting that stuff and managing expectations and relationships with the different stakeholders, and making sure the stuff's coming in through that path.
Can I ask a question about,
Yeah.
they have also marketing quotas. They have like some responsibilities towards the product line. Or then there's people that are responsible from the actual product development perspective for the product.
Yep.
So I see some of these responsibilities potentially being shared across different across people in the organization.
That certainly happens. That can happen. I think the key part where you can get some friction, and this is probably an area I would probably pay more attention to, is that when it comes down to the point where you've got to have one voice that's really prioritizing what it is that the team works on. So that can't be 3 people, that's got to be 1 person. Because when you have multiple people involved, that's when it really starts to get complicated. So certainly at a minimum, if you have a good relationship, being able to speak with one voice would probably work sufficiently well. But one of the things we're going to talk about is where do good product owners actually come from? I think that maybe gets to your question perhaps a little bit. David?
Let us bring the mic to you.
I'm messing you guys all up with this ad hoc question thing, right?
Nope. So good.
We're fixing it, Ron. Go ahead.
Okay. What is the difference, or maybe there is none, between a product owner and a product manager?
One word. I think different, so Scrum calls it a product owner, right? So that comes from Scrum. I think owner has perhaps a different connotation than manager does. In practice, does it really make a big difference whether you're called a product owner versus a product manager? I don't think so. I don't think at all. It's more about the responsibilities there. So each organization, if you go from organization to organization, you say, well, what does a product manager do here? It's probably slightly different definitions between different organizations as well. So I wouldn't read too much into the label. It's more about what are the actual responsibilities and level of autonomy and authority that person has, regardless of kind of the label that's put on them. That's probably a non-answer, but it really does depend on the situation.
It's not that different.
I don't think that they're that far apart. But again, it depends largely on the company.
Jason? In succeeding with Scrum, Mike Cohn adds one more bullet to that list, and that's responsibility for the time frame, defining time frame. So you've got a product owner who does all that stuff very well, gets the estimates and story points from the team, divides by velocity and says, so you guys ought to be done in 4 sprints. Can you comment on that?
Sure, I could comment on that. This is not an exhaustive list. This is a sampling of examples. As far as the dynamic of that probably sounds like it might be a little bit off, where may not be an acknowledgement or embracing the fact that change occurs and that estimates are in fact estimates and they're not things that are carved in stone. So probably some opportunity for some adjustments there. But yeah, so the point that I'm grabbing off of what you're saying is that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, and I don't want people to read it as such. This is kind of a broad example set. There's something more, but the thing that was there another question?
I was just wanting to reinforce that product manager is a classic terminology which was used until Agile came about, and product owner is equivalent in the Agile world,
Yeah.
basically.
Yep. Yeah, and I personally don't have a problem with either. So the thing that I want to stop and kind of talk on for a little bit more is has to make decisions to move things forward with limited information. So this is probably one of the things that becomes a hallmark of a good product owner, or what makes or breaks or distinguishes a good product owner from maybe a not so good one, is that product owners, teams, they never have all the information. It doesn't exist. So if we're constantly searching to get to the bottom of everything, it's going to create long delays and it's going to create a long lag time to try to figure things out. So good product owners have to be extremely comfortable making decisions with limited information. You never have everything that you're going to want. You're never going to know everything that you want to. So being able to look at what you have, make the best decision that you can, move on with it, and then when new information comes to light, be comfortable making that decision. Maybe you find that the decision you made before is the wrong decision. But this is one of the key things that you've got to be able to maintain our agility, maintain our ability to move quickly and be responsive. This making decisions with limited information is very, very critical. So this is one of the things that start to separate really kind of the cream from, well, maybe everybody else. Okay. So where do good product owners come from? So we've talked about some of the things that might make up good product owners and some of the things that they're responsible for. And, well, the truth is they can come from anywhere. I wish I could have put, I wish I just found the picture, but if I could have, I would have put a lot more pins on the map, but, you know, I guess that's the way it goes. But good product, yeah, these are actually just the only specific places in the world where product owners come from. They're not from there. I think Boston's on there, so I think we're okay, but I'm not sure.
And there's some red product owners and blue product owners.
Yeah, well, we can decide what we want that to be, but we have green ones and red state and blue state, I don't know. But I think regardless of where they come from, I think there's a few common experiences, a few common elements that actually can start to tie them together in terms of where the good product owners or common experiences they have. And so I've kind of broken into three areas or three things. Experience working in and around technology, comfortable making decisions with limited information, we just talked about that a little bit. And the third thing is domain knowledge. So we're going to expand on each of these.
Have you ever been to California?
Have I ever been to California? Yeah, no, I don't like California. Yeah, if I ever do this somewhere else, I should probably go. I didn't realize people were going to read into this so much. It's good feedback. I learn every time I do this.
In New Zealand, they always check.
But yeah. In New Zealand, they check.
New Zealand wasn't on your map.
I'll remember that. Jeez, okay, I gotta write that down. I gotta get a new picture. Okay. Nothing about anything else, just the picture. I can work with that. So technology experience. So there's, you've been in and around technology projects, there's kind of a flow, right? There's a flow of development. There's an ebb and flow that happens. There's a way, there's a pace, there's a cadence, there's how things work. So people who've had experience in and around that, who've been in that flow and have experienced it before, have been a part of it, that's incredibly important experience because, well, it helps you understand it so when you're walking into it, it's not completely foreign. And you actually understand the nuances of it. You appreciate the details of it. You understand the team dynamics. I remember early on in my career, being on the technology side of things, working on projects, and there was always this really big barrier, big wall, really high wall between technology and business partners. And it was everybody in the business thought technology, those idiots over there that just can't, if they could just stop messing things up and just do what we asked them to do, we'd be a lot happier. And so there really was this appreciation for the challenges that actually happened in terms of, hey, I have an idea, but yeah, you had an idea and you thought of it that quickly and you could describe it in 5 sentences or less, but it takes 4 months to do it because it's that significant. So people that have that experience and can bring that experience and can understand the ebbs and flows there, really important. Okay? One of the best product owners I mentioned earlier had experience in development, in marketing, and a few other areas, and was able to really bring that together. And it was actually an amazing combination. Again, from my perspective, in terms of working with him as a coach, she had a great skill set that she was able to really bring to bear to really work with the team in a very dynamic fashion. So, again, kind of beating the decision-making horse, you've got to be decisive. Be willing to make mistakes. I think that kind of complements the decisiveness in kind of in a weird way. Where, again, we're making the best decisions that we have with the information that we have in front of us, and then as we go forward and we learn more information, well, if I made the wrong decision, we're learning, right? We've got to be able to make decisions on the fly and do that. And again, going back to the rarely having all the information. Again, we rarely have all the information. If you're in a competitive market space, you're moving fast with a lot of stuff, you got time to market issues you got to deal with, you got stuff you got to keep pace with, you're never going to have all that information. Domain knowledge. This is actually kind of one that I learned more about due to a recent coaching engagement. having the right amount of domain knowledge really is important for supporting speed. So it shortens feedback loops, it builds trust with customers. So you always notice something when there's an absence of it. So I was working with a team, and we had a person that was playing the role of product owner, into the Agile thing, really supportive, like couldn't ask for a better person in terms of their desire and their passion. Knew nothing about the domain whatsoever. So what he had in terms of desire to learn and willingness to apply himself and really just kind of dig in, the challenge was that it would create really long feedback loops. So whenever the team had a question about something, well, he had to go all the way over and try to find time with the users to go sit down with them and actually ask them about it, because they were the domain experts. They had the domain expertise about it. So it became glaringly obvious of how much of an impact this actually was. And again, try as he might. Love this guy today. We work closely together, but the challenge was, and he knew it, he acknowledged it, he just didn't have the domain knowledge. So that's since been addressed, but it became very apparent that in conversations with the users, they started to look at him and say, I'm not really sure if you're the right person to be deciding what we're doing here, because when I describe what I need to, you're not getting it. You know, I have to go into a lot of detail, and I want to just be able to say, I want one of these and this, and have to do that, and you can go, oh, got it, and it can replay it back very quickly. So the domain knowledge is actually really, really important, and that's a critical element to help support speed and agility and responsiveness and confidence, and that's quite important. Having a product owner that people aren't comfortable or confident in, you're going to start to lose a lot of things right there.
If somebody has the basic intelligence and no domain knowledge, any rule of thumb how long it may take them to gain a reasonable amount? Like, do they do it in a month, a quarter, a year? It's going to be multiple years? Depends on how genius they are?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think it really depends on the individual and the domain area. I mean, so this particular person, I'd say he's been whacking away at it for probably 6 months now, and he's probably getting to be a moderate level of domain knowledge. But I think that's really subject to the person, their aptitudes. There's some people that are able to go from one domain to another and have it transposed very well. It's a good question. I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I'd be curious if anybody else in the audience has any thoughts or experiences they want to share on that.
So in terms of personality, so an extrovert, action-oriented people would be best suited for the job.
That's a question?
Yeah.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I agree. You don't have to be, but I think it certainly helps. I mean, certainly being a product owner requires kind of being out in front of a lot of things, talking to a lot of people. So yeah, I think there's a level of having a comfortableness in terms of interacting with those folks and shopping your ideas around and getting feedback on that stuff. And if that, I don't think it requires you to be an extrovert, but if you are, it probably doesn't hurt. So that was kind of one example, and I'll build upon the example of I mentioned it earlier, but one of the product owners I work with, having that marketing experience, having actually experience as a former developer, that really set her up really well to be able to be very attuned to what it is that she wanted, how much she was willing to invest in something, and the difference that made in terms of the team and their ability to move very quickly was really something to be seen. I was actually blown away by it. To this day, I think she remains on my short list of the best product owners that I've worked with. So, that it was funny because the marketing experience that she had actually let her really, part of the marketing was really slicing and dicing a lot of information, so that really allowed her to bring that in and say, if we do this, if we build this feature, I actually understand what the impact of that is from a marketing perspective. I had looked at data before that allows me to understand when we do this, this is the result. When we do this, this is the result. So that was very powerful in terms of being able to pull that in. So now's where I'm gonna make you guys do some stuff. So I hope you're ready. I hope the food coma hasn't set in. So this is interesting question. We're going to switch gears on you guys. So this question, I'm going to pose this question to you guys. So can an airplane fly powered only by the pilot's body power? This is a question. So it was 1959, and a British man named Henry Kramer had this question. This was his question. So he was a man of some means. So as such, he issued a challenge. It was called the Kramer Challenge. So the Kramer Challenge was, so this is 1959, by the way, so it's $1959. So 50,000 pounds for the first person that could build a plane that could fly a figure 8 around 2 markers that were 1/2 mile apart. Right? Second, and 100,000 pounds for the first person to fly across the English Channel. Okay, so in modern dollars, it's $1.1 million, $1.2 million perhaps, and 2.3 million, something like that. Okay, so we're talking about a substantial amount of money. So this was the challenge. So I'd like to put you guys to the test for a minute, see what you can come up with. So here's the Kramer Challenge.
What kind of money are you offering?
I have a wonderful orange marker. How's that sound? So what I'd like you guys, so this is the interactive part. If you guys turn to maybe the little group that you're with, spend a couple of minutes. I'd like you guys to just brainstorm a little bit and think about how you might tackle this. So again, here's the Kramer Challenge. So spend about 5 minutes. Talk about how you might approach winning this challenge. I want you to keep in mind the technology of the day. So it's 1959. It's fairly limited. I don't think we have computers in 1959. They didn't do much. Maybe they punched holes in stuff. So take a few minutes. This is the interactive portion of tonight's event. Enjoy yourselves. Take a few minutes. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Come up with something creative and innovative.
Design challenge.
All right, so if I can get everyone's attention. This is the hard part, reeling everyone back in. So if I could get you to stop your wonderful conversations, I'm sure they're very engaging. So yes, thank you. So you might be wondering, what the heck does this have to do with Agile? And it's a good question. Actually, nothing at all. But I will tie it back in a minute. So I'd like to hear from you guys. I'm kind of curious. So give me your best. What did you come up with in terms of how might you solve this problem? How would you approach it? Who wants to volunteer? Anybody want to volunteer? Knock my socks off.
And typically I break it down to first of all, the aircraft has a bunch of subsystems. Any kind of aircraft, there was some known, kind of designs they had. But they're trying to solve a problem. I looked at those two different problems. They're trying to solve a problem like kind of lift endurance. That's a classic aircraft system. So you prototypes you design potentially, and a lot of times they just try them out. So you have to figure out what's my lifting system, which is our human. That's your source of energy. And how can I actually couple that energy into the lifting mechanism, propulsion system? And then, for the, kind of perceived endurance, I have like weight problems and stuff like that have to manage, right? A certain kind of airfoil lift. So typically I do the analysis on that and then try out different types of coupling systems. Which would be like, I saw the guy on the bike between two wings. And then you prototype and design them. So you do iterative designs, go through that. They did a lot of those.
Did you guys talk at all about how you might actually do the prototyping?
It's like a metal bending kind of prototyping the way they do it. Typically, that's what happens. You come up with a design, sketch it out, and then you go and kind of hammer out the pieces. You wouldn't do a complete design, all your requirements all the way to the end, because that just didn't work, particularly in those days. The type of tools you had. It was very expensive in terms of kind of amount of energy or resource that went into, relatively speaking. But that's kind of how we use it.
Anybody else? What do you guys think of that? Pretty good, bad, better, or worse than you got something better than that? No, nothing better?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yours is better. Oh. I see how this is going to go. Oh, it's written down. Careful.
Well, it just sketch notes. But one of the first things we started was talking about the requirements. Does this have to be the same plane for parts A and B? Or do you have one that's optimized for maneuverability, another optimized for duration of flight? What about a launch vehicle? Is that Are there external systems allowed for that, or can you drop from another plane, or have some sort of launch vehicle associated with this? And then we're looking at some of the basic energy equations of, what are the energy requirements to accomplish this? What are the energy capabilities of the human? And then what are potential energy storage mechanisms? Can you preload an energy source, battery, rubber bands, something, and just to make the most of your energy over the flight duration.
So your whole thing was focused on how to cheat.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So you had a bunch of questions and an interesting idea. I think he's already.
No, it's just different things we were thinking about.
Okay.
But it does define some of your evaluation criteria for when you do come up with your prototypes. How are you going to evaluate them?
I think he's already spent the winning.
Yeah.
The same thing about figuring out like what is your kind of your requirement in terms of what endurance and what your energy source. Those are kind of important things
Sure.
in terms of defining the characteristics of the vehicle system. That's like kind of fundamentally sizes your vehicle.
Yep.
So
Yep. Who else? Anybody else want to offer anything? You're scared away by the two ideas so far?
So the only other things I think we'd add to that is rather than try to do physics here, we came up with two other things, which is you're going to need funding and you're going to need a team.
No one mentioned that, huh? Start there, huh? Okay. Anybody else? Brian?
We were actually discussing a model, a scale model.
So we were wondering if it would be possible, and we probably would have to do some math and some science, but if we could figure out basically the power that a human could produce on a bike perhaps, and then scale that down, and perhaps build model planes that we could kind of tinker with and try to prove out concepts.
What about just putting wings on a bike?
A really light and fast bike.
That could work.
So my group was Googling to try and find out how it had been done.
And what did you find?
Winning design.
We didn't find it.
Google couldn't find it, huh?
1950.
I found a nugget, huh?
The search might take like 50 years to return.
The ultralights didn't fly until the 90s.
So let's all very interesting ideas, very good ideas. Let me fast forward and tell you what actually happened. Okay. So here's what happened. 18 years went by. Many dozens of attempts occurred, and well, they all crashed and burned, so to speak. Well, they didn't burn because it was human powered, but they all crashed. So that's a long time, 18 years. Probably a lot of thought, a lot of effort that went in to try to solve this. Well, there were, I forget the exact number, there were dozens of teams as well. I think at least, there were over 18, I believe. I don't have the exact number, but it's a good question.
I don't need to know Jack, I just want to know round number.
52.5. So, enter this guy, Paul McCready. He's the guy that cracked it. So, he had a really interesting observation. I actually want to build on the prototype and kind of the iterative idea. So, what he observed, so he was looking at the 18 years of history that had transpired in terms of all these different dozens of teams and dozens of attempts that had made the attempts at trying to solve this. And what he found was that, so what they would do is they would come up with a design. And they'd spend a long time doing that. They'd come up with a design for the craft, then they'd spend a whole bunch of time, effort, and money to build the craft. And then they'd roll the thing out onto the tarmac, and they'd go to take off. And if it got off the ground, it would crash within a few meters. Or maybe it got off the ground, and it would fly for 100 meters, but the pilot would be so exhausted, he couldn't go any further. So then you have one data point. You go, okay, I got a data point. And they'd go back to the drawing board. And they would go back and they would come up with something new. And they would try to iterate on that. So even with the successful flights, you still had one data point. A successful flight of maybe a few hundred meters. Great, we can get it up, we can fly it a little ways, but we can't find somebody that's either light enough or that has enough endurance to be able to propel the thing far enough. How do we solve that one? So the prevailing thought of the day was, this is a really difficult thing, and this is a really difficult process, and well, this is just how it's going to be. This is just what it is. Big challenges require big effort. But Paul MacCready had a different idea. So here's the question. So Paul looked at it from a different angle. The question, again, was, can an airplane fly powered only by the pilot's body power? Here's what he did. He said, that's not the right question. The question is, how can you build a plane that can be rebuilt in hours, not months? Huh. So by fundamentally taking the question on the table and turning it sideways, he got something completely different. So from his perspective, the fact that it was human-powered was simply just a red herring. Looking at the 18 years of previous data, was it took everyone forever. They were trying to iterate, but the cycles were so long, you weren't going to get anywhere. You were going to get exactly where you were, which was nowhere. So he looked at it and said, the problem is the process itself. And by orienting ourselves to the process, it becomes a blind pursuit of a goal without a deeper understanding of actually how to do that. So he set out to build a plane that he could rebuild in hours instead of months. And what he did was he came up with a plane that was built out of mylar, aluminum tubing, and wire. And if it crashed, well, which many of them did, guess what? He could rebuild it, and he was back up and underway very quickly. So victory was his. So here's actually it's called the Gossamer Condor. This was the craft that won the first challenge in 1977. This was the one that won for flying the figure 8. This is in the Smithsonian, actually. And little more than a year later, this is called the Gossamer Albatross. This is the one that flew across the English Channel. And again, it was barely just a year after the Condor. So what does this have to do with anything? So what's interesting about this is that, to me, this is innovation. So taking the need for an iterative process and then taking the problem and turning it completely on its side, instead of just accepting it for face value, allowed breakthrough results to occur. So in the span of 18 years of dozens of attempts and probably millions of dollars or millions of pounds that have been spent on this, and one guy comes along and says, it's not the right question. Flips it sideways, and a year later, guess what? He's got it. So this is one of the things that product owners, if they can focus on something like this and they can take a problem and reframe it and turn it on its ear, you can see how something as simple as this can actually allow you to start to get breakthrough results. So it's not just taking what's in front of you and trying to figure out how to build a better mousetrap. Maybe you don't need a mousetrap at all. Maybe you need something completely different. It was funny, the last time we gave this, the group gave me a bunch of grief over this. It was, oh, you've got 18 years of attempts in front of them, new technology, and you can look at all the data. And but you could say that for every year that went by. Like the group that tried the year, in 1960 knew more than the group in 1959, and 61, and 62, and 63. And so, sure, you could try to discredit the guy, but the fact is he did something pretty remarkable. He figured out something that nobody else had been able to figure out. And it comes back to reframing the question. So, what are the lessons in here? When you're trying to figure out something hard, when you're trying to solve something really hard, re-ask the problem so your solution, the way you approach it, helps you learn faster. Learning is really important. Don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate the value of that. Okay? And failure is, in fact, part of innovating. So there's this actually, everyone knows Apple, right? Apple, you could certainly argue Apple's probably one of the most innovative companies of our time. So Apple employs this, we call it a 10-3-1 approach. So for every 10 ideas that Apple has, they will create an actual prototype of it. They don't just dream it up, they actually create a prototype for it. They go through a review process, they whittle it down to 3, and they take that and they whittle it down to 1. So 90% of the ideas that they come up with, they actually throw out. So if there's any finance people around, if you have finance people at your company, that will probably drive them crazy to think that you're actually throwing away 90% of the work that you're doing. But look at them. They're a shining example of how you can build innovative products and you can charge a whole heck of a lot of money for it. They don't care about price. They're not arguing. They're not trying to compete on price point. So, you know, there's lots of examples of companies like this, but certainly Apple is a great one to point at. It's certainly one that we can all point at in modern time. And you can go read up on Apple and how they do their product development. They've got a very it's funny because when Steve Jobs left Apple, they actually went through a period of time where they went through deep focus groups and they spent a lot of time. You know, the Palm handheld. So Apple actually had one in the early 90s, I think it was, early 90s, late 80s. They went through tons and tons of focus groups on it. They asked people, they brought people in, they tried to figure out what it is that you want in such a device. They sold 140,000 units. That was it. And until I was actually doing research on this, I never knew that they had actually built such a thing. So their current philosophy, or the philosophy they've been operating under for a while, is that they actually don't ask customers. They don't go talk to customers about what it is that they want. Because, well, customers don't know what they want. Customers might know what's in front of them, but what Apple's trying to do is they're trying to build what's around the corner. And well, I can't ask you what's around the corner because you don't know. So you talk about kind of the role of product owner and, well, the order taker, maybe they just go ask the customer what it is that you want. Yeah, that might be a product owner name, but I'm not sure that that's really a product owner that's really setting a strategy or a vision for where the product needs to go. Questions? Anybody's head hurt yet?
Oh, I did think about,
Did you figure out the design for the plane?
No, I did not. What I did figure out is what's the relationship between the problem and Agile. Is that in Agile, where the sprint has a shorter cycle time, you get a chance to go through a lot more iterations quickly.
Yes.
And that's what that person that who solved that problem did.
Right.
So that's what I wanted to say. The relationship between the problem and Agile is what he did, not the relationship on how to do the plane itself.
So you tied it back for me. It wasn't a question. It was the answer, but there was no question. You figured out how to make the connection. You made the connection from the example that we talked about back to Agile and how the shorter cycles from an Agile delivery perspective actually allows you to iterate more, which is basically what happened in the Kramer Challenge. So, switch gears again on you, a little context switching here. So, this is something that, this is actually, give credit to Brian. Brian came up with this. Is really great, actually. I think the more every time I go back to this and kind of chew on it and digest it, and I figure out another nugget in here. So, this is kind of some archetypes of product owners that we came up with based off of kind of experience and observations and collective coaching experience. And this isn't to say that everybody fits in these categories. These are certainly generalizations, and so I don't want anyone to feel like there should be like some type of legal disclaimer that goes on here. I want people to walk away feeling offended. But here it is. So we'll step through these, but we'll start down here with the stenographer. So we talk about product expertise, no product expertise, a lot of product expertise, lack of feedback loops, and presence of a lot of feedback loops. So the stenographer, and sometimes I kind of call this kind of the analyst in product owner clothing. The wolf in sheep's clothing, sorry. So kind of a lot of behaviors happen here. So you limited autonomy, really as a stenographer, it kind of makes sense, right? It's self-descriptive. So they're really the ones that's kind of just describing or capturing the notes from other folks. Someone else is probably articulating what it is that it needs to be. They're gathering a lot of their requirements perhaps from one source or maybe another source, maybe a limited number of sources perhaps. Not very vast or not very diverse in terms of strategic thinking, really just, again, gathering, collecting information. So they tend to probably be in a role where they're unable to influence the direction of things, where the product might be going. And quite honestly, they're not expected to add a whole lot of value. No offense to them, just the nature of the role. So this is one that certainly anyone who's ever been an analyst, I actually was a systems analyst. I started out as a systems analyst a long time ago. Yeah, I used to do this. I was essentially a stenographer. It was different then. We weren't doing Agile. I wasn't trying to be a product owner. But there are a lot of people who actually end up having the title of product owner, but really have behavior patterns that look like this. So this isn't all such a bad thing. There's certainly growth opportunities. Everyone's got to start somewhere. So some of the growth opportunities around building expertise, figuring out a way to engage a broad range of stakeholders. So start to pull people in, start to figure out how to get more opinions together, get more face time with those folks. Right? The decider. This is, I might describe this as someone who's confident, perhaps ignorantly so. So they're very good at making decisions. I talked about that, right? That's one of the important things about a good product owner is they're able to be decisive and make decisions on a very quick basis. The decider excels at this. They're really, really good at making decisions. They do this on a regular basis. They certainly have progressed away from kind of this notion of just being the scribe, just being the person who's kind of writing down stuff that other people are telling them to do, or what the product needs to be. So the cool part about this is as they've progressed away from that, they've started to gain some knowledge, and the fact that they're able to be confident in their decisions and they're able to make decisions quickly, it draws the team into them. Because, well, I have a question and, geez, you give me an answer. I like that. That's pretty good. This works for me. Right? That's actually good. It's not all bad, but there's certainly some opportunities. Oftentimes, the decider might have a vision, a product vision. It may be a misinformed one. It may not be a completely great or well thought through vision, but they often have some type of vision that they use to base their decision-making process off of. Something that they can kind of bounce it off of some type of sounding board. Again, not all bad. Maybe opportunity to further refine that. They may not be the deepest in terms of their subject matter expertise or their domain knowledge. So that's where some of the shortcomings can start to come in. So it's kind of almost foolhardy confidence. They have some knowledge, but not a lot of it. So the challenge here is that we may confidently be building an incorrect product or the wrong product. But we feel good about it. It can be a little bit dangerous, so you got to be really careful of that. So deciders, there's a lot of them out there. It's not a bad thing again, but this is more of a, as we talk through these things, it's more think about it as a progression of some phases that people might move through as they change their skills or as they grow in their skill set. Okay? So growth opportunities here, learning about the domain, figuring out how to engage a broader set of stakeholders. So they're pretty good at making small bets, so continue to do that. But don't be afraid to start to make the big hairy bets, the big hairy goals. Part of the idea or part of the challenge in terms of the domain knowledge or not having a ton of domain knowledge or just enough to be dangerous, really looking at kind of value stream, making sure that you understand the full context and the full value stream of this thing, that the product space that you're working in. So these are some areas in terms of areas for them to focus on working on improving. Then there's the really smart guy, the genius. Right? So deciders are admittedly more focused on the tactical decisions. They focus on the next release or prioritizing the next set of features. Geniuses tend to focus more energy on time articulating the big picture and creating a big ambitious vision for what's coming next. That's good too. That's not bad. As they progress down this path, they typically maintain the confidence that they had from the decider. That's good. We can build upon that. Some of the things, they're deep product domain knowledge, so they've really progressed in terms of that. So they've got a lot more domain experience, a lot more knowledge than the decider had. They're able to take that and morph that into creating new and innovative problems or solutions to problems. Some of the growth opportunities here, so, well, they're really smart. They are the genius after all. They've got to be able to convey things simply. That becomes a key challenge that starts to happen here. The smartest person in the room, you've got to keep it simple for everybody else. Once you get to this point, it's not like it's some plateau, but don't stop learning. Continue to learn. Continue to look for opportunities to learn from other folks, people on the team, stakeholders, people around you, marketplace, whatever it may be, critically important. And make sure that there's a level of engagement that continues to happen or maybe gets expanded upon with stakeholders. So often folks that are headed down this kind of decider path where they're very decisive aren't necessarily always looking for opinions to go, looking for input from stakeholders or other people because, well, they're really confident in what they know. Then we have the diplomat. And I'll actually, a mental note, come back to a point. So the diplomat, I actually, as I think more about this, I see a lot of this at larger companies. So you can see how, certainly some of the larger companies that I've been at and been engaged with and coached at, you have this big focus on consensus and making sure that everyone gets their opinion heard, and that, well, we're going to build it once, we're going to make sure that it's got everything in there for everybody that might possibly need this and address everything there. So certainly the diplomat comes in is that they're typically engaged with multiple stakeholders, so they're kind of, I might describe it as, they're sitting at the table but they don't really have a voice. So they end up focusing a lot of time around work prioritization, managing the relationships between different stakeholders, trying to gain consensus on everything. It's more like a mediator than anything else, how I might describe it. A lot of time managing conversations. What they lack in decision-making authority, they can make up for with influence. So they might be particularly good at influencing people in terms of helping to bring some of the stuff together. They're very good at knowing who to bring together to actually get decisions made. Still some room for improvement there, but can usually do this pretty well. So this is useful as well. This is the culture that you live in. So there's kind of an assumption that when we talk about the other path, when we talk about the decider and the genius, there's an inherent underlying assumption that exists there, which is the folks that are playing product owner, that are acting as a product owner, actually have the authority to make the decisions. And this is where the tie-in, certainly from a large company perspective, might be that a lot of large companies, people don't have that authority. People as product owners don't have, they may be, hey, your role as product owner, congratulations, or product manager, you get to slap the title on, but you actually don't get the autonomy. You don't get the ability to make those decisions on your own. So this is where probably more in the diplomatic space. So focus on trying to get beyond these zero-sum negotiations where everybody's happy. Sometimes there's winners, sometimes there's losers. Focus on helping to actually establish a common vision. A lot of times there actually isn't a common vision that exists here. It's more just political battles in terms of which stakeholder gets to scream the loudest or which customer ends up being the most upset and trying to figure out how to work through that. And focus on actually starting to bring disparate groups together. So bringing more voices in that you can actually have different opinions with different ideas. You can actually broaden this. And some techniques for the diplomats, again, making sure that we understand what our success criteria are, being able to put actually a face or humanizing customers, that's actually a technique that can work particularly well. Actually putting, I've actually seen this a lot where teams, product owners, whoever might describe, oh, the users are really annoying when this happens, and I don't know why we have to fix it this way. But to be able to humanize it and actually see it and see the complaints or see the concerns or see how people actually use or engage with the product, humanizing that, being able to bring that back to the stakeholders can actually make quite a big difference. And again, figuring out a way to help enforce and support rapid feedback loops, again, another critical piece in the area to expand upon. And finally, we'll talk about the catalyst. So the catalyst has lots of skills in negotiation. They're really good at managing others, but they've gained enough skill to be able to engage stakeholders at a different level. So before we had a seat at the table, now we have a seat and a voice. So I'm able to sit at the table and start to put my own suggestions and solutions on the table. May not always win, may not always get them, but I'm able to be there and have a voice. They've become very, very good at figuring out how to mix the right ingredients. So this is where the catalyst piece comes in. Very good at mixing the right ingredients of politics and other dynamics, demand, things like that, to be able to get the outcomes that they desire. So as we've kind of headed down this path, you actually can start to see how there's maybe some emphasis on some different skills. So in the decider path, we're really talking about kind of developing domain experience. Here, it's really more around maybe perhaps networking and figuring out how to manage people's expectations and stakeholders and things like that. So they've actually, depending upon your culture, it can actually start to create different emphasis on different skill sets. So certainly the Catalyst has developed enough knowledge and experience to be able to have a good voice, that they become a trusted voice. But they may not have as much domain experience or domain knowledge as maybe the Genius might on the other side of things. So areas to continue to grow, further product expertise, and figuring out ways to identify areas of further innovation. So these are, again, these are generalizations. But when you start to look at it, we start to go through this, and actually, it says The Alchemist here, we changed the name on it, I realized I didn't put the right picture in there. But that's the one. So again, these are generalizations, and in fact, you could probably extend this and say, well, maybe there's some point where things come back together. And it's not that either one of these paths are right or wrong. There's no right or wrong answer here, but more just reflecting of state changes that people tend to go through based off the experiences that we've seen. So by being able to actually articulate this in some fashion, you can actually start to talk about, well, you know, back at our company, our product owners tend to look more like deciders. And, well, what do we want to do for that? Or maybe they're more different, or maybe they're really just geographers. So maybe, should they really be called product owners? Or maybe we need to start talking about what we can do to actually make them real product owners. What does that path look like to help them get into a position where they can do the things that product owners can and should be doing? So to take this and reframe it a bit, I like reframing, we talked about that, reframing it. So to take some of the definitions we talked before about from a product owner responsible for maximizing the value of the product and the work of the development team, well, maybe we could reframe it to say that a product owner is really responsible for building better and innovative products that are simple and that make users actually want to use them. What if that was a description of a product owner? Would that change things? Would that change how we act with product owners? Would that change the orientation that product owners take? Probably. No, you don't think so?
No, I mean, if I were given either of those assignments, I think I'd do the same thing.
I'm not saying that my reframing is perfect. I haven't got this skill down. I actually was a little bit about me actually. So I'm my background: systems analyst, project manager, development manager, led some organizations. Had the chance to play product owner, so I'm like, okay, great, I'm gonna be product owner. These guys, all the product owners I work with, they have no idea what they're talking about. I'm just gonna knock the ball out of the park. I was horrible as a product owner because the challenge that I always had was I would describe it, the team would build it, they'd bring it back, and I'd go, huh, that's exactly what I asked you for. But it's not what I need. So as clear as I thought it was here, I hadn't figured it out. And so for me personally, that was a great learning opportunity for me. Having, you know, until you walk in someone else's shoes, you always think, oh, that's an easy job. Why couldn't they just figure out how to do it? Personally, I was horrible at it. So that was a huge learning opportunity for me. And it gave me a great amount of respect for people that have to play the role of product manager, product owner, whatever that is. It is far harder than I gave it credit for. So to those of you that are product owners in the room, I applaud you because you don't have an easy job. And for those of you who think it's easy, try it one day. Maybe let me know how it goes. But it is actually very hard. At least for me it was. But there's a bigger challenge here that there's some numbers that kind of get thrown around a bit that I want to talk about. So there's some surveys that were done a while ago that came back and said almost 2/3 of the features in any given product are rarely, if ever, used. What does that suggest? Over-engineering.
Marketing asking for more than they need.
Marketing asking for more than they need. Poor design.
Then you have more than one user.
We have more than one
Different
user.
users will want.
That's good though, because then we're in business then.
Right. Well, I mean, it doesn't happen because people are stupid. It happens because, different users have different requirements. No, it's not. There's no feature that's not used by anybody.
David, go ahead.
Some very important features are only used occasionally.
Exactly. Everyone's been there, right?
Like
Dave, I'm sure you've got some great stories, Dave.
Well, I don't think we have time for a story. I was just going to say two things on that. Is one thing is a lot of those features are in there because you're predicting what people might want.
Yeah.
You don't really know. Yeah. And the other one is 2/3 is part of the story, but the other part is a lot of those were actually more expensive to produce than they provided value. Actually,
Exactly. So I all correct, all great points. I'm a simple guy. I like to dumb things down and keep it really simple. I'm a fan of the KISS. So I just describe it as if 2/3 of the products and 2/3 of the features in any given product are rarely, if ever, used, I got to ask the question, say, are we actually building the right product? Do we really understand what it is that we're supposed to be doing here? So it's obviously a very dynamic thing. It's very complicated. There's a whole lot of stuff involved with it. But you can imagine if we were able to start to get some of that back, some of that percentage back, and maybe it was 50% instead of 2/3, that we could actually start to apply to product feature sets that people actually want to use. That would be an amazing difference.
It's just another cause, what does come up a lot is companies build to the most demanding customer who wants the most complex product set.
Sure.
Only the largest customers want.
Right.
Very common.
Because they pay the most.
Because they pay the most, but then
Yeah,
it turns out
absolutely.
it makes it too difficult to use.
It's
so
real.
it just gets simplicity.
It's absolutely real. All right, there's hundreds of causes. I'm not suggesting it's a simple problem.
If you build 1/3 of the features, how can you know, are those the third that people are going to use?
So, well, I don't know. How would you do that?
Right?
Well, I think we've actually talked about an example that we could probably build upon. We've already discussed it. Get feedback. Right. So there's another stat that kind of goes with that, which is this 2/3 number, which is on average 80% of a product's features are added after its first release.
That's
Once
good.
it's being used, people know what they want initially.
But so let me. I'm very curious. My experience tells me one thing, but I'm curious what your experience has been. So on average, is the conversation for a first release of something, is it usually let's just keep it small and get it out as quickly as possible, or is it let's figure out how to jam everything in the kitchen sink into it because we got to make the right splash?
Yeah. No, keep it small and get it out.
Keep it small and get it out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. I haven't heard a whole lot of those. Anybody else? My experience might be completely blown out of the water tonight. That would be cool.
So I would say, keep it small and get it out, not because that was the objective, but because the objective was to meet a time frame, and the time frame forces it to be small.
Okay. Go ahead. Hands
With
everywhere.
startups, you keep it small and you have multiple releases. For larger companies, that may not work because, as you said, there are many customers that have demands and somebody has to prioritize. But when you're in a startup or something very small, you don't have much time and you recognize you don't know it all. So I think it really differs based upon the type of company that you were at.
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked on a large project at a large company, and this was a kind of the public face of this. The website was this part of the website was kind of the public face of it, and let me just tell you that first release date kept moving out and moving out and moving out, and we needed more and more and more and more and more every single time. And it was, the date was the flexible point, and we just kept piling stuff onto it. It had to be perfect. And I've had that experience, and I know others have had similar experiences in terms of things at large companies. So I do think that the company size and the space that they're playing in has a lot to do with it. So the startups I have some friends that are in startups, and it's very different.
The three biggest Agile projects that I've worked on have all been rewrites of legacy systems. And it's very, very hard to...
I'm sorry.
I just drew the short straw. But it's very hard to convince people to roll out partial functionality and avoid big bang releases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only way we've come close to that is by building enough infrastructure to scaffold partial replacements and have two-way data integration so that you're keeping most of the old system in place and replacing it piecemeal. And that typically doubles the cost of the time frame to do the project.
Brian?
I just built on the example of the rewrite, and actually it's a very well documented case with Quicken and QuickBooks, because finance is being something that people don't really want, to kind of muddle through, where Quicken for several years had a very hard time escaping an annual release, and the only way they were able to was to re-engineer their platform such that you could run multiple versions on the same system. So you'd almost have your old version that was like could not be corrupted, and then you would layer newer code bases on top of it, so that you could test new features, you could literally roll features out, but there was no chance you could corrupt the old thing. So they literally had to re-architect the technology to support, an iterative delivery but the improvement in the customer satisfaction and their ability to actually respond in less than a year more than made up the investment.
You told us about a product owner who knew exactly what he wanted until he saw it. How would you advise a product owner to avoid having that experience the second time around?
To me, it comes back to feedback. So the mistake, certainly that I made, was that I wasn't doing a good job working with the people who are actually going to use the system and looking to solicit their input and feedback. To me, feedback, I don't say it's a silver bullet, it's not, but it certainly cures a lot of ails. In terms of if I'm able to work on figuring out ways to get increments of feedback in small pieces on a kind of a continuous flow basis, that's great medicine for a lot of things. So that's what I would have done if I had the smarts to figure that out then. We live in, hindsight's always 20/20, right? But,
The nice thing about the software tools is we actually use our own stuff.
yeah, you eat your own dog food, so to speak, right? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And Apple takes a different approach by making sure they have ownership of that usage model. And, you know, they invest so much in the upfront and, you know, what they expect somebody to be able to do with it. It's not what the customers are saying, but this is the solution we're going to offer. And oftentimes they draw very rigid boundaries on that. But they take ownership of that space and work towards that goal.
They to build on the eat their own dog food mantra, they actually have, like, one of their key things is they actually say is that we build products that we want to use. And they've got to use their own stuff. That's a big determining factor in terms of how they approach their product development. It's significant for them.
So in other words, it's really the revenue customer.
In my past experiences was you have to focus on the revenue customer, not coming from every angle of the sales. Because every sales, they're responsible for each area of their customers. They all want to bring some features, want you to develop. But as a product manager, as a product owner, make sure your revenue is coming from the right place in your first release.
It's really challenging. I had the opportunity to work at a software company for a while, and it was a very different beast. It was a very different dynamic than certainly my experience had been previous to that. And it was very sales focused, perhaps too much so, where it was just anybody who's standing there with a check, we'll build it. And then it was this long list of promises, very short in terms of delivery of stuff. So I acknowledge this is why I have a ton of respect for product owners. I have a ton of respect for product owners that operate in the public space, because it's incredibly demanding. You've got 1,001 demands that are being placed upon you. You've got to figure out how to keep all those things in the air. And having a product strategy, having a product strategy is important. Having a product vision is important. And maybe the product vision is, well, we're just going to chase the thing. We're in a place where we're cash strapped, so our vision is, well, we're just going to chase the money. Okay, let's just say that, so that we know that that's the mode that we're operating in. But certainly where I was, there was not really a strong product strategy, and that you could see that come through in a lot of different ways, where it was a lot of, we were kind of really going, I would say meandering would be generous. It would be a generous description of how it was. It was very erratic and zigzaggy in terms of what we would actually work on. And we'd get stuff halfway, 3/4 of the way done, we'd stop because somebody else showed up with something else. And it was very, very bizarre. So I can only speak to my experiences, but it was very challenging.
Does the product owner necessarily manage the project? And if not, what's the relation between the product owner and the project manager?
Okay, so in Scrum proper, there is no such thing as a project manager. There's a Scrum Master, and there's a product owner. And then the third role that would be we kind of put into that cluster is basically the role of team. So the closest tie I might make to a project manager might look something like a Scrum Master, but by proper definition, the roles and responsibilities are in fact different. The Scrum Master is typically responsible for what we would call progress reporting, but they're not the one that's responsible for making the dates or setting the dates. That might be more, I would probably put that more in the camp of the product owner and say, well, what feels like the right amount of stuff that we can actually get to actually release the product? What's our critical mass that we need for a minimal marketable feature set? So I would say probably a combination of different things, so the product owner working with the team, but again, it's kind of an apples to orange, I think apples to oranges conversation in terms of project manager to the Scrum proper roles.
Kind of the product owner and the Scrum Master together are kind of two attributes of what otherwise would be the project manager.
Yes, that might be a good way to put it. There's other things that go with that. It's not just that it's simply that, but I would say some of those pieces might be broken up across those two. I would say that. So 8:20 is that when I'm supposed to be done? Okay. Maybe one more question and then I'll move on.
You talked a lot about the vision, and like, so where's the line between giving the developer a problem to solve versus saying, hey, I need this, I need a box here?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Where's
Yep.
that?
That's a really important one, actually, because as a product owner, if I just come in and say, look, I've got all the answers, I just need you to shut up and build it, that's not going to really work well from a team dynamics perspective. I know that I've never been on a team like that where things have gone particularly well. So I like to think of this in terms of if the product owners have a good understanding of the domain and the problem that needs to be solved, and they're willing to work with the team to figure out how the best way to solve that, and there's a high level of collaboration in figuring out the solution. So it's always like, look, I just got the answer, just do it. As a developer, as a team member, tester, whatever it is, I'm not particularly motivated. Right? I'm really there probably just collecting a paycheck, and there's a whole lot of other places you could do that, and I don't know that working in an agile environment is going to be the best place for someone like that. So that could be a whole other topic that we can talk about in terms of certainly extending the topic of discussion here. But it is important. I think that product owners have to be able to have that ebb and flow and that give and take with the development team to be able to allow them to extend things, allow them to come up with better solutions. So it's an important part of the collaboration. All right, a couple more and then I'm done. So the whole framing thing here was making the leap. So how do you actually do that? So break it down, try to keep it simple. If you're a fan of the simple stuff. So this is stuff that we've talked about. Re-examine the problem. We've talked about this. By figuring out how to look at the problem different, you can start to see different patterns and solutions emerge. This is important. This is a skill to work on. I need to work on this. This is a hard thing to do. But be able to take the problems in front of you, step back, turn it sideways or upside down, shake it up a bit, you get completely different things. Right? Learning to learn. Emphasize learning as a key way of being. Don't be afraid of being wrong. Learning gives product owners real empirical data that they can use to iterate very quickly. So iterating is important, learning is important, short feedback loops. Certainly something I talk about a lot when I'm coaching teams is that feedback loops are your friend. The smaller and tighter you can make your feedback loops, the better off you'll be. Being able to be decisive, again, we've talked about this, so hopefully this is a summary of all the stuff we've talked about, but figuring out how to make quick decisions with limited information and limited visibility, it's a key trait, it's an important trait. We saw, we can see how we talked about some of the characteristics or some of the personas. There are different paths depending upon the environment or culture that you're in, but certainly being able to be decisive about stuff, if you have that ability to do so, if you have the autonomy to do so, it's important. And learning the domain, understanding the problem space that you're in. I talked about that in terms of real examples. With this knowledge, maybe you can go back and you can start to see patterns of things happening in your workplace. But you can certainly see how with someone that doesn't have a lot of domain experience acting as a product owner, it really does actually end up slowing the team down. It slows the team down a lot. So having that domain knowledge in the space that you're operating in is a critical way that you can gain trust, respect of both the team as well as the customers both. So these are four takeaways, 4 things to go think about in terms of 4 things to focus on, how you can actually start making the connection points from business analyst, systems analyst, whatever you may be today. If you have aspirations to be a product owner, these are some things you can go back and focus on. Yeah, it's this is Apple's, right? So Apple's philosophy. Whatever you end up building, make sure you be willing to live with it, using it every day. It's Apple's philosophy from a product development perspective. I actually like this Marcus Buckingham quote, misstep in the right direction. A misstep is a step in the right direction. So, questions? I think I have a look at exactly each one.
Is there one or two questions? Okay.
You barbecued me during the talk.
They bombarded you
You
during the
bombarded me,
talk.
sorry, I thought you barbecued me. Thank you very much
I
for
want
your
a hand
time.
for
We
our
appreciate
speaker.
it. I'll leave this with interesting thing about 2010, the top 10 products that we never knew that we needed. It's kind of interesting.